Hello friends and welcome to Metal World channel. Today we have with us a very special guest, Professor Amol Gokhale. Professor Gokhale has been BTech from IIT Bombay and then PhD from University of Pittsburgh. Thereafter, he joined DRDO and spent 30 good years there. After that, he spent some time in DMRL and now he is professor in again Bombay IIT. Welcome, Professor Gokhale.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very happy to be
And
on the Metal
thanks for
Worlds
sparing your
platform.
time for Metal World channel.
Sure.
Uh, Sir, we'll start the conversation, and I would like to ask you the first question. Now that we are 4 months down the line in COVID lockdown period, so how do you see the state of the metals industry or metallurgical industry in these 4 months?
Okay. So I'm very happy to be on the Metal World Forum second time. First time after becoming the president of Indian Institute of Metals. Just a small clarification from my introduction. DMRL is one of the constituent laboratories within DRDO. So
Okay,
DMRL is actually part of DRDO.
okay, okay.
So you just asked me the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the industrial sector. I would first of all say that the effect of the pandemic has been felt not just by the industrial sector, but by the R&D sector. And India has a very sizable R&D sector under DRDO, ISRO, Atomic Energy, CSIR, ICMR, ICAR. We have a very wide network of R&D laboratories. And apart from that, the educational institutions such as IIT Bombay, where I'm a professor right now, is also could not escape the adverse effect of the pandemic. And finally, it's the individual person who has felt, the common man, so to say, has also felt the impact. But since the industries affect the economy immediately, we will elaborate slightly on the industrial part of it. Now, if you slightly take a step back and see what was happening before the COVID-19 pandemic reached India and it flared up, you will find that the economy was already in a state of slowdown.
Yeah,
And if you take, say, February production of automotives, a prominent company in India reported 30% lower production of the vehicles on year basis. And so that is a very representative example of the manufacturing sector. And most of the manufacturing industries, like automotives, are located not in remote areas, but they are very close to the industrial cities of India, such as Pune, Mumbai, Chennai, Bangalore, Delhi, Gurgaon belt, etc. Now, here the pandemic flared up first. So the manufacturing sector, which buys the primary metal, reduced their production substantially because of disruptions in the labor and the logistics. Because as we know, when the lockdown started, nobody could come out, so the labor couldn't report. There was a fear among everybody, which partly exists, of course, today also. But then this labor problem was there, and then the logistics also, because in the beginning, except for essential services, no other movement was allowed on the roads. Once the manufacturing levels reduced, then it had to have the effect on the primary metal sector also. Initially, say March or April, and I was in touch with some of the primary metal producers, the primary metal production levels, they were able to manage keeping up very close to their normal levels because many of the primary metal producers are located in remote areas
hmm,
of India. And also many of them have their own townships.
yeah,
So they were able to, first of all, get their workforce in a safe way to the workplace. And secondly, this workforce was quite a bit protected from the outside world. So because of that, the primary metal production levels were fairly okay in the initial part of the pandemic. But as the manufacturing sector reduced the orders, the demand, the primary metal producers had to lower their production levels. And when the labor also reached their own hometowns, in remote areas, then I noticed that whoever was reporting 90% production level, now they were saying that they had to have staggered working hours, and it came down to as much as 50% in some of the remotest places, because they suddenly started seeing the numbers, the COVID-19 affected people numbers started
Yeah.
rising. So overall, if you see from say March, April to end of July, I would rate the production levels anywhere between 30% to 90%. The mining sector was also not without being affected, but the mining sector had some innovative solutions, and they reported that they use advanced technologies such as remote sensing, and then staggering their working hours and remote operations on one hand. And on the other hand, what they did was they extended credit, and they paid to their ancillary units for advance orders, so that there would not be any disruptions in whatever supplies they were supposed to get. But just to sum up the answer, let me say that the labor and the logistics apart, it is the MSMEs which took the largest hit, because in addition to labor and logistics, they also suffered from liquidity crisis.
Yeah.
The small MSMEs, the secondary melters are often MSMEs, the aluminum casters for automotives, they all belong to the secondary sector, and they have a hand to mouth kind of existence. And so due to lack of customers on one hand, and due to lack of primary metal supply on the other, they suffered the most. And it is this sector I feel that is badly in need of help today.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yes.
If I may say, if I may add one more point, sir, this migration of labor, most of the labor migrated from western states of the
Yes.
country to the eastern states. So, in fact, I am in touch with some of the manufacturers in eastern states, and they said that they, in fact, gained from this migration. So, the availability
Okay.
of labor in those states increased during the migration, and there was no adverse effect on the manufacturing of those companies. But in any
Okay.
case, as you said, the finally it is driven by the demand. So today the demand is around 50% or so, as we gather from the industry, and so is the production at that level. So 30 to
Yes.
50,
Yes.
whatever you have said is right.
Yes. Yes.
Sir, the next question is, you have spent a lot of time, in fact, whole of your career in research on defense materials or whatever industry materials. So today it is said that the technology is the driver of the industry. So how do you see this in India? I mean, in Indian context, do you see there is a need for upgradation of technology, or the approach of people need to change or something like that? What is your comment on this issue?
Yes, so restricting my answers to, let's say, the non-ferrous sector, which I have more familiarity,
Yeah.
and non-ferrous metals which have some effect on the economy, start from aluminum, copper, zinc, on one hand, which are commercial metals, and on the other you have critical metals such as rare earths, tungsten, lithium, cobalt, and so on. So starting with aluminum, now there are technological solutions available for a very long time, I would say. It's not like it's revolutionary, but the companies abroad have been using those technological solutions, which are partially implemented in the Indian industries. Now, everybody, the listeners would know that the quality of the product depends on the quality of the metal that you are producing. Once you make an aluminum billet, and which is full of inclusions and porosity and so on, there is no way to get rid of that in the final product. And say in India, 8 to 10% of the aluminum gets used in beverage can manufacturing. In the Western world, it is as high as 30% in some countries. And it is this consumer friendly, very common product, which is technologically most demanding one, because it uses very thin sheet products. So it is very less tolerant to the presence of defects, because the surface area is so large
Mhm.
that all the defects would be revealed. Now there are solutions available. It all starts from the raw materials. What goes for consumer goods goes for the engineered products as well. One of my friends from ISRO once told me that he visited the Kisan ketchup factory in Bangalore, and they wanted to show him the final products, and he insisted on going where the tomatoes are actually incoming and processed actually. And then he was a consultant to the company, and then he gave many interesting suggestions to them and told them that no matter what flavoring agent or what coloring agent you finally use, it's the input department which you have to fix first. So similarly here for aluminum alloys, both the can stock as well as for aerospace alloys, both are very technologically demanding alloys.
Yeah.
It's the quality of the raw material that you use. Just to illustrate for the benefit of the viewers, if the sodium and the calcium levels in that aluminum are high, it causes edge cracking. So you may trim the cracks and get rid of them, but then the yield will suffer, your product price will go up. If the hydrogen content in the melt is high, it's going to show up in the form of blisters. So then your process yield reduces, and then the whole commercial viability of the alloy reduces. In more high-tech alloys, the iron and silicon contents cannot be tolerated beyond some levels. The typical aerospace alloys today, the global standards, use less than 0.1% of iron and silicon, and many of the latest alloys use in fact less than 0.05%.
Oh.
So then the raw material, that aluminum that is used, has to be of proper quality. And then when you look into the aluminum production itself, you can relate that to the quality of the anodes used, the quality of the crucibles used, and so on. So that's how you need today inline processing, process like inline refining of the metal, such as degassing. Now very high-tech rotary degassers, which have a high longevity, have come into the market, which are coated with silicon carbide, which is more wear resistant. Or you can now use ceramic foam filters for getting rid of the inclusions. There are better crucible coatings, better atmospheric control to avoid oxidation and the formation of endogenous inclusions. So at the metal level, actually, all these known technology solutions can be implemented. And towards the end of this narration, I'm going to tell you what is the other end of the industry doing also. I've been a witness to some of these low-end aluminum casters also.
Okay.
But then apart from the metal, when you cast it, now a lot of people do electromagnetic stirring, because electromagnetic stirring controls the grain size. If you refine the grain size, you reduce the occurrence of hot cracking. And when you reduce the hot cracking incidence, you can actually increase the casting speed. We know that the aluminum casting speeds will never be as high as steel casting speeds, because the way aluminum solidifies, it has a long freezing range compared to steel. That is iron-based alloys.
EMS also controls the air entrapment in the melt.
EMS is actually more for breaking the dendrites.
Okay.
And then reducing the grain size and making it more equiaxed, which is otherwise columnar in case of aluminum.
Yeah.
So this way, there are, and better cooling methods are available today in DC casting.
Yeah.
There are polymer quenchants with a different kind of cooling behavior. So there are technological solutions are there. And just to illustrate the point in terms of what is the ground reality, I had been called earlier by some of the user laboratories within my own organization to see why the castings are having unreliable properties. And when I visited the foundries, I found that actually they were not even using one of the simplest instruments, that is a dipstick thermocouple, to measure the temperature of molten aluminum before casting. They were going largely by the experience and the skills of the workers. They just look at the color of the melt.
Color of the melt. That is the conventional method.
That is a conventional. Now, you might be able to tolerate that for, say, some of the low-end products.
Yeah.
But today, really, there are very less low-end products today. Even an automotive engine block is a high-tech product. Yeah. And wrought aluminum alloys are going to be even more high-tech. So a simple instrument which is now made in India and actually speaking available very easily, but they somehow didn't want to use it now. Things have of course improved, and I have seen very high-end foundries also, which use the
Yeah,
low pressure
yeah.
die casting. And they have gone to the extent of online quality measurement through radiography, sending back the signal to their low pressure die caster, and
Yes,
then
yes.
making online changes to the die temperature, molten metal temperature, etc. So India is, of course, the disparity in everything is very high,
Absolutely,
and
absolutely.
that goes percolates into the industrial sector as well. But coming to the latest technologies, the manufacturing sector is fast uh, imbibing or adopting to the industry 4.0
Yeah,
principles and the smart manufacturing. Our own IIT is about to establish a laboratory in smart manufacturing, and machine learning center is also coming up here. So these are the new solutions coming up, and metallurgical industry should not be very far away
mm,
from this, because otherwise in the global competition, I think they will lose. And today we are all, and we at least aspire to be part of the global supply chain, and so we cannot be ignorant about what is happening globally on the technological scene as well.
definitely, definitely, sir.
Yes.
Definitely. In this context, sir, what new opportunities you see for the Indian manufacturers or the Indian metal manufacturers for that matter?
Okay. So in as far as the non-ferrous metals industry
Yeah.
or even steels are concerned, recycling today is a huge opportunity. Recycling.
Yes, yes.
And so in steel, as we know, I think about 30% of the steel, or maybe today it is 20%, but the government wants to take it to 30%. Steel is now planned to be produced in the secondary sector,
Yeah.
which partly uses the sponge iron and partly uses the scrap,
Scrap.
because it can use non-coking coal.
Yeah.
So it's a huge benefit for India. And the small MSMEs, which are actually the secondary melters, have unfortunately less control on the availability of iron ores also. So they depend more on the availability of scrap. Similarly, for aluminium, I mean, I'm aware that in Russia and many advanced plants that I've seen, they use as much as 60% scrap in aerospace aluminium alloys.
Okay. Okay.
But then there has to be a certain pre-processing to be done, so that the oxides of aluminum don't all get into get ingested into the final product. There is some pre-processing, so there are technologies associated. But unless they use this much of scrap, the
Mm.
price of their aluminum alloys will not be competitive globally. So
Yeah.
it has become a necessity, and we all know that the electronic waste is piling up, and the cities are now known as they are known as urban mines actually, for all the valuable metals. There are laboratories which are developing techniques to separate precious metals from the electronic waste, and it is for industries to learn and adopt those solutions, because it's a dual purpose. One
Yeah.
is that they can reuse the metals, and other is the environmental pollution, the solid waste management problem is also taken care. But there's a challenge here. The challenge here is that many of the recycling technologies themselves create effluents, and
Okay.
also they use high amount of power. So here, I think partly government should help, and I was just reading that government is coming up with a policy on utilization of non-conventional energy resources. And if they can create such parks, so to say, technology parks,
Mm-hmm.
where actually non-conventional like solar energy is made available to some of these sectors, because they will have a good social impact also if the solid waste is managed very well. So one is the recycling part of it,
Yeah.
huge
Yeah.
opportunity. The second opportunity in the commercial domain is making high-tech alloys, because high-tech alloys, though made in smaller quantities, but they command greater profit margins, and they give you a name actually. So today India makes aluminum, we all know that, but how many aerospace alloys are Indian companies able to make today? Means they may be able to make today, but they are not making, because they don't have the infrastructure. The aerospace grade alloys need industries which work with different culture, not just
Okay.
different set of equipments, but it requires different set of human resources and different kind of a culture, because the certification of aerospace products is a completely different ball game.
Yeah, of course.
Yes,
They
but
must be
then
different from the bulk alloy manufacturing,
absolutely.
bulk metal manufacturing.
They are low volume but high value
Absolutely.
products. But here the problem lies in the fact that the demand is somewhat low, and even low demand is not a big problem, but the demand is uncertain often. So if the government actually has long-term plans in some of the defense and aerospace sectors, and they get the industries into confidence, and they can implement the GOCO model, which is government operated, corporate owned, where the government can actually invest in the high-tech equipments, so that the industries don't feel the pinch right in the beginning before even getting any order,
Yeah.
and they can be the producers actually. I'm sure that the industries can access the technology both from their own in-house R&Ds or some of the R&D units in India under DRDO, CSIR and ISRO, and also they can import the technologies if they wish. But it is the high-tech alloys which is a big sector, which is I think unexploited in India. And I was very happy that the previous defense minister, Mr. Manohar Parrikar, had come up with a policy known as IDDP policy, which was industrially designed, developed, and produced materials and components. And so he gave a lot of stress to the indigenous design actually,
Yeah, he was
because
from your college only.
he was from IIT Bombay. He was my classmate also in the metallurgy department.
Yes.
So he had that vision actually. He brought it in the defense procurement policy document 2014. And I will come to the second half of my answer, which is related to there are several critical metals. So earlier I talked about commercial metals, but now I am going to talk about critical metals. So in critical metals, there are certain metals where the deposits are available in India. For example, India has got tungsten deposits, it has got rare earth deposits, as well as it has got magnesium deposits. The deposits are there. Some of them are mined, like rare earths are mined, magnesium also may be mined, but then we don't produce the metals. And there have been some attempts here and there, scattered attempts have been there, but no concerted effort to make sure that these metals are produced. Today, rare earths are used in all the high tech miniaturized motors, all our laptops, our cell phones, our cars, the aerospace vehicles, their inertial navigation systems, they all use BLDC motors. And these motors requires rarer permanent magnets because that's the only way you can miniaturize them. They are high powered
Yeah.
magnets.
So just a minute. I think
Sure.
you are on the Rare Earths Committee of Niti Aayog also.
Yes.
Yeah. So
So
that.
Niti Aayog actually had this vision
Uh,
that India needs to have an end-to-end solution for rare earths. And
okay.
the reason they thought is from both ends. There are device makers today, or even there are drone makers. There are so many young people around 30 years of age. They are able to make drones actually, and both the defense as well as civilian uses are there. But when they start to purchase the miniature motors, they find that those motors, motor manufacturing capability exists, but they say that we are not able to source rarer permanent magnets. So
Okay.
there was a demand from the manufacturers of the end products, and then the India also has rare earth resources. They are all lying along the coastal line of peninsular India. We have rare earth resources. So Niti Aayog thought that why don't we have somebody study the complete value chain, right from ore all the way up to the motors,
Okay.
which can be bought indigenously. Today, huge amount of devices we are buying, and indirectly we are importing the rare earths. And there are rare earth magnet makers also in India, and how they are making, they are buying the raw materials from China.
Okay.
And now suddenly there is a ban on import from China, and all their investments are actually now in big risks because they can't manufacture. They were never demanding the metal from Indian sources. So now, thankfully, we made a report. We had very capable people in the committee with a lot of years of experience. Many of them, my colleagues from the Indian Institute of Metals as well. And the recommendations have been accepted as recently as last month. And Dr. Saraswat, who is the science member of Niti Aayog, has actually directed that the oxide to metal technology be established in India, and he has made sure that the funds are made available to the R&D laboratories. And it is my further effort to say that the R&D laboratories do some hand holding with private industries who have expressed interest in producing not only rare earth metals but also magnets, that they get involved right from the beginning. So like rare earths, there is tungsten metal also. Deposits are there. Nobody's mining today tungsten, but tungsten is required for the armaments today, which defeat heavy armor on the main battle tanks. And we have a factory in Trichy which produces those armaments, but there is nobody to make metal. Why? Because China was supplying the metal at very cheap rates till recently. And they can stop that tap, they can close the tap whenever they want. And the third metal is a magnesium metal and lithium metal also. So magnesium resources exist. Unfortunately, industry was also there, but it had to shut down because I think nobody was buying magnesium at that time. But magnesium is a very important alloying element in many aluminum alloys. Magnesium used as a reductant to make titanium sponge, and today in India we have a titanium sponge making facility in Kerala, thanks to the DRDO technology, DMRL technology, in fact, and ISRO's investment. So we have a 500 tons per year titanium making plant in Kerala that uses magnesium also. And magnesium gets used in so many other applications, lightweighting applications. But today there is nobody to manufacture magnesium. So I think that like Niti Aayog effort, a second effort is required to also look into the production of these aspects. And before finishing this answer, let me also mention that I was also part of a inter-ministerial committee on strategic metals and materials. All strategic metals and materials. Again, thanks to Mr. Manohar Parrikar, he only had the vision and he had established this committee in 2016. And he gave a lot of importance. He attended every meeting, gave valuable suggestions, and this committee made many reports, gave a tool to implement such a policy, and established that countries like USA have also policies on strategic metals. They established them right after First World War, and there have been as many as 10 revisions in that strategic materials policy, and it continues till date. India is one of the few advanced countries, technologically active countries, which does not have any policy on critical and strategic materials. And just I heard that Prime Minister is about to sign that strategic materials policy initiative, the cabinet note, which has been submitted to them almost, I think, a year back. And we hope that we have a good news very soon, so that many centers will come in India, which will take up the cause of these strategic metals.
Thank you, sir, for this very elaborate answer. And I think this new initiative and new progressive approach by the government needs to be, complemented by the private sector also. And there lies the very big opportunity for them as well, commercial and professional opportunity. Yeah. Sir, let's talk something about Indian Institute of Metals. You have recently taken over as president of IIM, and many congratulations for that.
Yes.
Sir, tell us something about the activities of IIM.
So, IIM, which is often confused, of course, with the more famous IIM, which is the Indian Institute of Management. But we are actually older than the Indian Institutes of Management. Indian Institute of Metals was established 74 years back. And on 24th February 2021, we are going to celebrate the 75th anniversary of our institute. It was established way back in 1946 by people coming mainly from industries, actually, because there was no forum that time which had a voice of industries. But the institute took a decision that we will not be a commercial organization, we will not be a lobbying organization, but we will be an organization which at the core of which lies metallurgy and materials engineering. The knowledge in metallurgy and materials engineering will be at the core of all the functions of this institute. And therefore, over the years, I am proud to say that our institute has maintained a very careful balance between academia, R&D, and industries on one hand, and a careful balance between the private sector and the government sector also. And because of that, today we have multiple programs, and the advantage of having a very well balanced approach I felt the most during the corona pandemic, because when the industrial sector is going through a critical phase, how to run the institute and its activities. And I was reminded of Churchill's statement during the Second World War. He said that we should not let a crisis go to waste. Actually, we should be more imaginative. We should do better than what we were doing before. So we realized that because we have this academic and research component also, and we have certain goals there, we can further those.
Yeah.
And so what this institute is all about, it has got nearly 8,500 to 10,000 members, as our some of them are life members, some are corporate members, and others are individual members. So 4 or 5 important activities that I will mention. Everywhere you find that the link is to metallurgy and materials knowledge. So first we share the knowledge through symposia, conferences, etc. Then, and also we publish technical papers.
Yes.
Yes. We impart knowledge, so we upgrade the professionals working in the industries and other sectors by conducting courses also. We test knowledge. We have a syllabus for something known as the Associate Membership of Indian Institute of Metals, AMIIM. It is comparable to AMIE, let us say, where we have a syllabus, and those who clear the examinations, they get a certificate of AMIIM.
Okay.
And I'm reminded of IIT Kharagpur when it was established. They had actually written down, boasting their metallurgy program. They say that our program is as good as the AMIIM program, actually. Okay. So that time for IIT also, the AMIIM program was like a paradigm to compare their program with. Was a benchmark. So the program was so good, and people who have done AMIIM have gone all the way up to PhD. Many of them are abroad, many of them are serving well at high positions in the Indian industry. So that is our testing the knowledge. And then also we aspire to create white papers where we are doing value addition to the existing knowledge. We have a pool of experts. So if we deliberate together and we take specific problems, then we can do value additions and create wisdom out of that knowledge and create theme papers, approach papers, white papers, whatever we say, and submit to the government. Now, this very important function, unfortunately, we have not done so well so far. We need to do much better on this front. But I think the time is ripe for India as it is aspiring bigger and bigger things. So we need to take up this role more. And we have also a very important journal called Transactions of Indian Institute of Metals. For the last 15 to 20 years, its performance has improved significantly. It was a loss-making unit at one time, but we kept running it because not looking at the financial situation, but because of the service the institute was doing to the fellow professionals. But now I'm happy to say that it's actually a surplus-making venture of IIM. And not only that, it has got an impact factor more than 1.2. 2019 impact factor is more than 1.2. And people from as many as 15 countries are publishing in our transactions.
Fantastic.
And yes, and we have actually editors who are international, based in Europe, US, and India, reviewers.
Very good.
And yes, and reviewers and editors. And lastly, we have published low-cost textbooks, and we of course publish very specialized content in the form of books with our preferred publication partner, which is Springer Nature as of today. Okay. So we have a multitude of activities, and our hands are full. But still, we are looking at newer opportunities.
Sir, now you are the president of the association. What new initiatives you propose to take?
Yeah, so actually, when I took over, I gave a sort of quick look at the vision, during this 1 year, what I would like to do. So some of them are incremental changes. Like currently we have a CII IIM short courses a platform we have created. Already uh, one course has been already given. My predecessor, Dr. U. Kamachi Murli, took that initiative, and now another 4 courses are in the pipeline, 3 or 4 courses under that CII-IIM initiative. And I'm very happy that good industry and R&D sector people are participating. But what we see here as an opportunity is that we are now going to propose stringed courses, not just one course, but a collection of courses. Some of them will be from open platforms such as NPTEL or Swayam, which are now freely available. And people can do those courses and also do our own specialized content. And in our own specialized content, our instructors are usually from R&D and industrial sector, apart from the academic world. So people get to learn real life examples, some problem solving, knowledge about the new equipments, etc. And if those people who complete a set of courses will get a level 1 certificate, level 2, level 3 certificate, the advantages to the individuals also, because the industries, I'm sure after 10 years or so, they will recognize this. Just like the ISNT has got this NDT level 1, level 2, or Six Sigma Institute has got this yellow belt, green belt concept. We will also introduce stringed courses, and the institute can also make a decent revenue from such courses. Then our flagship journal, Transactions of Indian Institute of Metals, it's purely on metals and materials. Yeah. But lately we are seeing the importance of design and manufacturing. They cannot be separated anymore from purely materials issues. So now the mechanical engineering people on one hand and the physics and chemistry people on the other are also very tightly now embedded in the materials domain. So to give due recognition to that, the renewed interest among the manufacturing community and the material science community, we would now like to introduce one special issue every year out of the 12 issues, which is totally dedicated to design and manufacturing of metallic materials and other materials as well. And depending on the interest, how interest picks up, eventually, who knows, after 3 or 4 years, we may have a separate journal on design and manufacturing also. Then one of the important new things which has not been done, and you will also appreciate because of the nature of your work here, is we want to create databases here. Today, the world is very much data dependent, data hungry, but there's a dearth of quality data actually. There is a lot of data, but they say garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't use qualified, good quality data, then your predictions, the prognostic predictions are going to be affected. So IIM, by virtue of the fact that we have 55 to 56 chapters all over India, almost all across the country, with their help, we would like to create databases on the metallurgical industries and the manufacturing industries in their own zones, the R&D establishments and what is the nature of their business, the educational institutions and what kind of courses they are teaching, and see whether we can help these 3 domains of metallurgy, whether we can help the industry by telling that, look, these are the places to source your engineers from. Similarly, the educational institutions can tie up with the industries. And once the data is captured in the form of RDBMS, that is as database, then you can actually do data analytics in the future. And then you can do some kind of a predictions and advise the government also. And the second kind of database is purely technical, namely the materials database, the properties of the materials. Today, you might have known that a lot of the people are actually doing, apart from the physics-based modeling, they are doing data-based modeling. During the COVID-19 crisis itself, so many predictions came purely based on the data. And the Materials Genome Initiative in the United States, which the previous President Obama, he launched actually. So that kind of importance it has, Materials Genome Initiative. They want to reduce the materials development to deployment cycle from 20 years to 5 years with a lot of database modeling, aiding the physics-based modeling and experimentation. So if we create databases, we help industries to create databases. they can derive on their legacy knowledge after several years. And the whole culture may change. They will be better prepared to retain the data in the form of databases, not just PDF documents, but as databases, which after several years, then they can use to develop maybe new alloys more quickly and to be verified through experiments using data-based modeling.
Yeah.
Then we want to, yes, you were saying something.
No, I was saying that database remains the basis of lot of high-end activities. Once you have
Absolutely.
database, lot of high-end activities can be envisaged.
Yes.
That's
And
one thing.
with,
Second thing,
yes,
that in the form of 55 chapters, we
yes.
already have infrastructure in place. So it can be used for many such reasons and which are useful for the industry itself.
Right. And we need to get some high goals to our chapters also,
Yeah.
so that they are also enthused actually. And then, we don't have a very stable interaction with any international society. After all, Indian Institute of Metals is known either through the Indian diaspora abroad or even otherwise through our journals. But we need to have a strong and sustainable and stable relationship with the international societies, because in the global world, when the supply chains are global, the institutions are also opening campuses worldwide,
Yeah.
then even the societies need to interact. That way we can avoid duplication of efforts, we can learn from each other, and we expose our own members to what is happening elsewhere in the world. So it is our goal this year that we want to have international societies memorandums of understanding signed with at least two or three or up to five international societies of repute, both in the Western world and also in the Eastern world, because the Eastern world actually looks up to India as a senior partner, some of the
Yeah.
countries. And so we would like to join hands with some of these countries as well, so that we learn from each other, because all the professional bodies, basically we are all professional bodies, we are supposed
Yes.
to co-prosper. And so it's in this, it's in the within the sort of the our theme of our conference of our institute.
Yes.
And also we like to create theme papers in areas such as critical metals, environmental issues, urban mining, rare earths for the government.
Yeah.
But we will need to approach specific ministries because small amount of expenditure may be involved. We'll try to generate little funds for that and establish groups, specialized groups of experts which can actually study and create such theme papers. And I was mentioning in the beginning of our interaction today that the institute is going to celebrate its platinum jubilee on 24th, and the entire year, in fact, is going to be celebrated. In fact, next November, our NMD ATM 2021 program will be in Vigyan Bhavan, and hopefully we have a VVIP as the chief guest there. But during this platinum jubilee, we are going to have monthly activities involving a lot of young people. It is one of my endeavors to involve more young people. I want to bring more gender diversity in the way our council is, who are the main stakeholders, which are like the board of directors. We are incidentally a Section 8 company, so we have a 60-member council, and we have now more women and more young people than before, and we hope that new ideas will come because of their participation. So that's the Platinum Jubilee. And finally, we like to improve the digital outreach as well. I'm very happy to say that you have actually sort of been one of the first actually to interview me. So we like to reach a larger audience across the nation. And my younger members have already, and members at the IIM head office in Kolkata have already created now. We are active on 4 digital platforms, namely Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And all our upcoming programs are already listed on Twitter. There are 3 or 4 programs coming up, starting with a course on 2nd September. And in fact, today evening, 5:30, the IIM Baroda chapter is inaugurating its website in my presence. So all these events will now be seen on Twitter, because I find young people, including my students, they just check what is upcoming on these digital platforms. So we like to interact with our stakeholders as well as our members through the digital platforms. And finally, to summarize, because among all the details, finally it's the high points which people remember. So I would like to summarize that in the coming year, I would like to lay greater emphasis on training and reskilling of the industrial manpower through courses, because I believe that the most important resource that any organization has is the human resource. The financial resources come, financial resources go, there can be changes, but it's the human resource which is to be most carefully picked and most carefully nurtured. And that's where our institute comes into the picture, is that we can help in training and reskilling. That's point number one. Point number two is that we like to create specialty workshops on emerging topics for academia and R&D, such as machine learning, industry 4.0, additive manufacturing, designed materials, smart materials. We like to create relevant databases, as I was elaborating earlier, and we like to introduce student activities and include tutorials, problem solving kind of interactions with them, and also to bring the students interfacing with industry. Many industries I find today are not hiring metallurgical engineers where actually they should. So I like to know from industries what is it that the metallurgical engineers are lacking, and then even the curricula in the academic institutions can be improved so that the employability of our metallurgical engineers improves. And then finally, would like to create status papers on certain themes related to materials technology, find the technology gaps, such as we found for the rare earth committee for Niti Aayog, but this can be done by our institute also. In future, I would like such organizations such as Niti Aayog, they should reach out to Indian Institute of Metals actually and say that please come and work with us and create theme papers and be part of the national effort to help prosper our economy in future. So these are some of the goals of the coming year. So it's going to be a pretty busy year this year.
Thank you, sir, for a very elaborate answer. Just one point I would like to add, that you mentioned about the metallurgical engineers, how are they employable or what. There's nothing lacking in metallurgical engineer. Only thing that they don't want to work in metallurgical industry. There was a study made by Ministry of Steel few years back that 70% of the metallurgical engineers immediately leave the metallurgy after passing out. So that we need to look at, why they don't want to work in metallurgical environment. So maybe for commercial reasons, or maybe for, people don't like to make their collars dirty. They want to have white collar jobs, or maybe IT jobs, most of them. So that was the picture at that time. But maybe today the environment in metallurgical industries has also changed to a large extent. All control rooms are there and everything is there.
Yes.
Maybe there is more interest of from metallurgical
Yes, in
engineering.
fact, now
Yeah,
that's true. The metallurgical curriculum also needs to do some brand building
yeah,
and needs to bring in more advanced areas like machine learning. See, all metallurgy people learn mathematics early on, but
yeah,
they somehow soon forget many of them. And it's the chemical engineers and mechanical engineers, they retain their mathematical skills, but increasingly materials by design,
yeah,
design processes, process modeling, the metallurgical community is also rising. They are also becoming increasingly mathematical, and they
yeah,
need to understand that metallurgy cannot be in isolation. They have to also learn things which are beyond the traditional areas of metallurgy. So by we hope to attract some of the best manpower of the country. Actually, let me mention that in 1962, the College of Engineering Pune is my hometown. They started the metallurgy as a first time as a branch actually. And that time the interscience people, the toppers of that year, Pune University people actually took the metallurgy as
oh,
the
that's
engineering branch.
great.
And some of them made it to very, very high levels, positions in top industries such as Tata Steel and SAIL. Many of them
Okay,
became entrepreneurs, many of
yeah,
them went abroad for PhDs and so on. So we need to create that glory back into metallurgy,
yeah, some
and that
brand building is needed.
absolutely, you are right. Actually, brand building is needed, and so, but that's what actually, these are the imperfections in our education. Maybe that drive us to work and seek that perfection. Otherwise, we will be complacent
Yeah,
and
yeah.
not work. Yes.
Anyway, sir, thank you very much for very elaborate answers for all my questions. And really, it was, I must say that it was one of the most informative interview I have taken. So
Thank you very
many
much.
thanks for that, and all the best for your tenure in IIM as a president. I am sure IIM will go places in your leadership. And thank you very much for being with us, sir. Thank
Thank
you.
you for wishes. Thank you for having me on this platform. And we look forward to co-prosper with your own Metal World also, because we are part of
Yeah,
Metal
why not?
World.
Why not? Why not?
And so let us co-prosper together.
Thank you.
And I thank you once again. You are a very good interviewer. You asked all the right
I don't know
questions.
that,
Uh,
but your
yes.
answers were really elaborate and very useful for the industry. I must say that whatever, that progressive approach by the government or the researchers like you, the private sector has to take advantage of all this knowledge base and the progressive approach. Unless and until private sector comes forward, there is no future for all this research or approach. That's what I feel.
Yes,
Is it not?
absolutely. Absolutely. There has to be a collaborative approach, a
Yes,
forward
yes,
looking approach.
yes.
And so we also all have to rise to that expectation actually.
Thank
And
you. Anyway,
before
sir,
we
thank you
leave,
very
I
much.
would like to wish a happy Independence Day
Yes,
to
yes,
all
yes.
our viewers
Today we
today.
are
It's
observing, yes, 15th
on the
August.
Independence
So
Day.
happy Independence Day to everybody. And thank you
Yes.
very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
So this was Professor Amol Gokhale. He was, I must say again that this was one of the very finest interviews we had, and very informative, very useful for the industry people. And I would again like to thank Professor Gokhale and end this conversation here. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you to all.